Channel 3 Moscow is a production of KTCA-TV, Channel 2, for stations of the Minnesota Public Television Network.
Hello, I'm Jan Smeby. It's been a dramatic week in Soviet-American relations, especially with the release on Tuesday of Anatoly Sharansky.
Suddenly, behind a Secret Serviceman fingering his gun, Sharansky appeared on the brink of freedom. A last farewell to officials who delivered him from a Soviet labor camp to the border. And then, flanked by two American ambassadors, Sharansky walked into the West.
But while the Sharansky release was big news this week, the whole month of January was full of interesting things on Soviet television. During the next hour, we'll see how the Soviets reacted to the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, how they paid homage to Martin Luther King, how they celebrated their own winter carnival. And believe it or not, we'll even see the Soviet version of break dancing. We have an exciting show for you, so stay with us for the February edition of Channel 3, Moscow.
Здравствуйте, товарищи. I'm Joe Summers. By far the most shocking story for us and the world last month was the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Almost immediately, news of the disaster appeared on Soviet television. This report from January 29th, which we found unusually straightforward and sympathetic, describes the tragedy. Our reports are narrated by Laurie Kamen and were translated by Basil Ivanov.
Потерпел катастрофу американский космический корабль многоразового использования «Челленджер».
The multiple-use American spaceship Challenger suffered a catastrophe. On board were a crew of 7, including 2 women. Approximately 2 minutes after liftoff from Cape Canaveral in Florida, when the ship was located above the Atlantic Ocean, there was an explosion. Apparently, one of the 2 solid fuel canisters exploded. Engulfed by flame, the ship plunged into the Atlantic Ocean. Rescue ships and helicopters were dispatched to the point where the ship fell into the ocean. However, in the opinion of experts, they doubt as to whether the astronauts were able to survive. The search for the 7 crew members of the multi-use Challenger shuttle only yielded burning pieces of wreckage, which did not give any positive results, stated the representative of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, at a press conference. In connection with the Challenger catastrophe, President Reagan canceled his appearance in Congress for his annual State of the Union address. Instead, the leader of the country appeared on television, telling the people that the loss was one for the whole country. The president noted that in spite of the catastrophe, the United States will continue its space program.
Soviet coverage of the Challenger disaster did not end here. Personal regrets from Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and other Soviet officials were also expressed.
Михаил Сергеевич Горбачев направил президенту США Рональду Рейгану телеграмму.
Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev sent a telegram to the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. The telegram reads, "Dear Mr. President, we share your sorrow over the deaths of the shuttle crew Challenger. We offer our sympathies to the people of the United States and to the families of the crew." In connection with the deaths of astronauts Francis Scobie, Michael Smith, Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe. With the deepest sympathies for their American colleagues and with sympathies for all of the families of the astronauts, this wish was sent by the Soviet cosmonauts Shatolov, Grumin, Leonov, and Kubasov.
With us tonight and just returned from the Soviet Union is Nick Hayes of Hamlin University and Macalester College. Nick, welcome back.
Thank you.
Were you in Moscow when the space shuttle blew up?
Yes, yes.
What was the public reaction?
The public reaction was one of surprise and genuine grief. It was played through the media as a straight story. There was no editorial cheap shots, and it was also played as a breaking story. Frequently in Soviet news, things will be done retrospectively. They'll wait until the event is in hand. But they played it as the news unfolded over several days as to what was the nature of the tragedy. And the key thing is that the point in the coverage was that a genuine tragedy occurred in America with which we should sympathize.
Yeah, there wasn't a mention, for instance, of any possible military uses of the space shuttle or anything of the sort.
Well, in the other press, there were some allusions to, you know, the commercial uses, the military uses of the shuttle and so on and so forth, but that's not surprising. What is surprising is that the overwhelming weight of the coverage was designed to really be a very sympathetic portrait of an American event.
Nick, do you find that unusual given some of the other tragedies that have occurred in the United States and clearly would have received coverage in the Soviet Union, or is this typical?
No, it's not a typical Soviet coverage of an event in the United States. A typical coverage of an American disaster, an aviation disaster, will emphasize that these are typical of Western capitalist corporations. They don't happen in the Soviet Union. They emphasize poor quality control, the emphasis on profits and capitalism. This was played as a tragedy, not just to the nation, but to science. And you know, it's also something they imply that the Soviets share. We share an interest in space, we share this commitment, and we also share the heroism. The portrait of the American astronauts as real human beings, as heroes, Soviet cosmonauts indicating kind of their shared destiny with them. It was quite an unusual story.
Nick, how aware are the Soviet people of the deaths of their own cosmonauts?
Not very aware at all.
They're
Not very aware at all. There was some allusion in the coverage to Soviet problems in the past, but this has never been officially discussed. The real publicity on, I believe we know of at least 3 aviation space disasters that have resulted in fatalities, is not something that's generally covered in the Soviet Union.
Nick, you've been to the Soviet Union more than once. Did you notice any difference in mood or anything different that's going on this time?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, really? What's going on?
It's a time of hope. I mean, people are hopeful. They're anxious to talk about things. And it's also a time of youth. That is, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, every bureau chief you met, every significant bureaucrat would have been aged 65 to 70. Suddenly, every bureau chief I met was between 35 and 45 years old, spoke perfectly English, and referred to, since I became the bureau chief last November. And, you know, quite frankly, under Brezhnev, if you were young, it was something you disguised. And clearly, the message is that it's now time for a new generation. And it's also time to speak candidly. People feel they can talk about things. Under Brezhnev, in 78, 79, at the end of the Brezhnev era, nobody sensibly would have bothered to have an opinion about Brezhnev. Now, people want to talk about Gorbachev. They may not agree with him, but everybody has an opinion. And he's stimulated curiosity, interest in the state.
Well, fascinating, and I'm sure that we'll hear more of it later on in the program. But now, after viewing many hours of Soviet TV over the past several months, we have found lots of interesting and amusing entertainment programs. And this past month was certainly no exception. Ed Sullivan would have loved this next segment. It has singing, dancing, acrobatics, puppets, and for you die-hard Minnesotans, even a winter carnival.
When most of us think of winter carnivals, only one comes to mind, the one in St. Paul. But as we can see from this story from January 27th, Soviet students know how to enjoy winter too, even without an ice palace.
It's the time of student vacations in Moscow. Our correspondents visited the national exhibit of the achievements of economy in Moscow. During the course of the exhibit, one can see unusual attractions, you can meet leading scientists, participate in lively contests, join a literature club, win a prize at a quiz, or visit an art display. Vacation, vacation. We are not accidentally beginning our report sitting on a sleigh. Today, at the exhibit, this is the most comfortable form of transportation. This is the kind of weather reindeer like best. And today, we will travel around the entire exhibit, which has turned into a student town today. Of course, the students all consider the reindeer to be the best form of transportation. Actually, the reindeer are one of the attractions that are also enjoyed by the students' children. This is your first time at the exhibit? Yes, my first time. Also enjoying the holiday are these giants. We saw these enormous puppets, and we have stopped here so you can actually see how big they are. I'm here to interview this puppet. What's your name? Alezhevi. And the puppet's name? Kryusha. How do you like working in Moscow? I like it a lot. Where are you from? I'm a student. But from where? Dnepropetrovsk. I wish you a happy holiday. Thank you. That is, to you and the puppet.
А вечером гостеприимная хозяйка ВДНХ распахивает двери молодежных кафе, дискотек, клубов.
In the evenings, the kind hostess of the exhibit opens the doors of the discotheques, youth clubs, cafes, and an entire program of dances. Come down here and you can participate too. More than 80,000 students will spend their winter vacation in Moscow.
Soviets might not have an ice palace at their winter carnival, but they do have plenty of ice. This next segment came from an entire show on ice, similar to our own ice-capades. We've seen puppets on Soviet television before, but this next segment from January 27th describes how puppeteers bring their unusual creatures to life.
It is said that puppets are for the entertainment of children, but the creator of this scenario would have to argue with you about this. She is Natalia Nashid. Why she, an artist, and Nikolai Kumov, who is in charge of the program to 16 and older, want to show is how easy it is to make puppets for a school presentation or for the discotheque. Soviet commentators often decry the so-called decadence in the West. That's why on January 27th, we were surprised to see this on Soviet television.
Чехословацкий певец Иржи Корн и группа спортивного танца предлагают вам последовать их примерам.
The group of sport dancing asks you to follow their example. As you can see, everything is pretty simple. Try it, and while you may not become a great dancer, a place in the School of Gymnastics will be within your reach.
Singers, especially those from Eastern Bloc countries, receive a lot of airplay on Soviet television. In our December show, we saw this performer, Carol Gott, sing Stevie Wonder's I Just Called to Say I Love You. This month, he sings a duet with this young girl as part of a traveling youth fest.
Já slyším zpívat v každém z nás. Poslouchám a chvěje se mi témou hlas. Zvonky štěstí, já slyším zpívat v každém z nás.
In addition to Czech singer Carol Gott, another regular face on Soviet TV has been American expatriate singer Dean Reed.
I don't know. I think I have just disowned Dean Reed. But in any event, welcome back, Nick Hayes. And also joining us with Nick Hayes this evening are Stephen Feinstein, a professor of Soviet history at the University of Wisconsin at River Falls, and Adele Donchenko, a Russian and Eastern European Studies professor at the University of Minnesota. Welcome back to both of you. I don't want to dwell much longer on Dean Reed.
He's the hero of our time. Look, we sure win the cultural exchanges. We get Baryshnikov and Rostropovich, and they get Dean Reed. I think that's just fine.
What I do want to ask, let me start with you, Nick. What I do want to ask is, where do they learn breakdancing in the Soviet Union?
I don't know if I can answer the question specifically.
They were very good.
In terms, for improvised dancing, rock music, and performances, they come out of variety dance ensembles. There's a regular institute and program for these types of variety ensembles, and they frequently include improvised contemporary dance. They're the ones that did the videos we saw last summer and things like that, and they're very good. Although I think the key is you probably, at the main institutes for a young person to study dance, such as the Bolshoi Dance Institute in Moscow, it's not taught there. This is something that they master.
It's gymnastics, a form of gymnastics, I think.
But if you look at the whole folk tradition in Russian culture, Ukrainian culture, I mean, you have that folk motif with people doing all sorts of aerobics. What amazes me is that it hasn't happened before. I mean, it's sort of a natural spin-off of the folk motif, but of course you have that official dictum to culture which maintains that folk overlay, and the recent regimes have not really allowed that on the stage. Now you have this liberal quality which is permitting something like this.
But there's two kind of artistic traits that when they're allowed to do it, they do very well: jazz and rock. And we tend to think that they only do clones of our entertainment and things like that. But no, in point of fact, they seem to have a natural spontaneity and respond well when given the opportunity to do it.
Well, I think it was very obvious. If you happen to look at the faces of these break dancers, there were no young adolescents. These were all older people who probably had gone through a gymnastic school or a folk dance. Even most of the people, I think, who go through the folk dance institutes do have some training also in ballet as well.
This is sort of what you call planned spontaneity, Soviet style. But
that's good.
It's good that it's good that it's there.
What's so interesting, though, is that the spread of pop culture seems to just go one way. Unless I'm missing something, there's no corresponding spread of Russian pop culture, whatever it might be, into this country. But here we have the puppet show. The theme is D-I-S-C-O, disco. And the people doing breakdancing, and Dean Reed. Is there something going on here that I'm missing?
Well, frequently, I mean, I feel perhaps America's most invidious influence on the 20th century is its youth pop culture. It seems to be pervasive. But it's not just American, it's European. That is, and what you're seeing in the Soviet Union right now is a pervasive spread of contemporary youth culture and popular European rock and East European rock into the Soviet Union.
That disco beat you heard was more of a European type of disco sound than you would find in the United States.
Yeah, I have one specific example. In the last year, we talked about this in our earlier program. Some of the best Soviet rock groups were disbanded last summer. But at the same time, in this fall, they've opened the door to some of the best Italian rock groups. Italian rock was the hot thing in Moscow when I was there. So there's an irony of a certain sort of domestic repression, but a flood-in of European contemporary youth culture.
More of a Western than an American.
You know, the Russians as a civilization have been dealing with this for over 100 years. The question is, what do they take of their own? What can they keep? What can they sort of glorify, glamorize? What do they take from the West? If they take too much, it's sort of a cultural nihilism that they go through.
Well, I watched 10 hours of Peter the Great.
That was American decadence in its highest form.
But apparently it goes back farther than that. This tension between folk mores in Russia and what's imported from the outside. It's not a specifically communist problem.
Well, of course, right now the thing is that it's very difficult to travel, even to travel to the Eastern Bloc countries for a Soviet citizen. And anything, you know, forbidden fruit, anything that's beyond, that you don't have access to, has a certain glamour, a certain interest, and this is, if it's Western, it must be good, must be interesting. This is what the youth, most of the youth feel.
When you don't have access, there's always the question of groping too closely at anything that drops by your door. And this has been the traditional problem in Russian culture. It often has excesses, a kitsch quality from time to time. but it inevitably settles down, as Nick mentioned with the case of jazz. Jazz in the Soviet Union is very good.
Now, how widely seen would be Soviet television across the entire Soviet Union? How many millions of people were seeing the kinds of things that we just saw?
Many.
Wide audience.
Very wide.
So it is very wide.
Moscow station is carried across the entire Union, and televisions are easily available. In fact, it's historically one of the few items you can buy without having to have all the money up front. The first item that was available in credit payments were televisions.
You drive through the countryside, and even on the old traditional log houses, you'll see television antenna.
Thus, the impact of what they choose to show is really significant.
Yeah. In the 1920s, the big issue was electrification of the country. In the 60s and 70s, it was television. And I think it's a vehicle of propaganda, primarily. That's their attitude. Well, but obviously, it has other cultural aspects to it.
But a quick political point. In the fall, there was a major controversy over the policies and use of television and radio.
Oh, really?
And the party, the new chief for that program, Lugachev, had emphasized that this television is to be used for propaganda and political education purposes. They're saying that, but there's no question that what you're seeing is a relaxation and an innovation and more spontaneity in terms of the popular culture they're putting on.
Well, we are going to move on now to another area. Over the past several months, we've seen lots of shopping stories on Soviet television, mostly about shortages of consumer goods. Well, this month's consumer news was not only upbeat, it was unusual, featuring stories about a do-it-yourself store, a store on wheels, and sensible fur clothing to keep you warm during that cold Russian winter retail season. Take a look.
For most of us, fur coats are considered an expensive luxury. But for many living in the Soviet Union, furs are not worn for fashion, but for basic survival, as we see in this report from January 25th about a fur clothing factory.
The temperatures are 50 below here in Chukotka. Ordinary clothes offer little protection for the Siberians from this kind of cold. But many of them have to work outdoors: geologists, builders, hunters, reindeer herders. But try to buy coats, hats, gloves in the stores. There is a very small amount of warm clothes available. One clothes outlet is in the Magadan Oblast of the Ministry of Light Industry of the USSR. The Magadan citizens organize the production of winter clothes and footwear on site. In many of the sovkhozes, there are clothing factories. We shot these scenes in the Chukots village of Loren. The main goal of the Loren Cooperative is to make clothes for those people working in the tundra. This kind of a fur outfit protects a person in freezing conditions and in blizzards. The clothes are comfortable, flexible, and only weigh 3 kilograms. These winter outfits, as well as sleeping bags made of fur and animal skins, are in great demand not only by reindeer herders, but by geologists and hunters, too. The factory produces hats as well as boots and slippers, using fur from young deer and other animals. In the last year, the factory turned out 200,000 rubles worth of goods. By the end of the 12th five-year plan, this figure will double.
We've been surprised at the number of consumer-oriented stories we've seen on Soviet TV. This report from January 23rd describes a new store in Central Asia, designed to solve previous shortages of consumer goods.
A most unusual store has opened in Alma-Ata. Shibir in translation means clever and skillful with their hands. This is the name of the new store in Alma-Ata. You can create thousands of items if you have imagination, can work with your hands, and have our products, so say the clerks of the store. The goods offered here are out of the ordinary: balls of yarn, dowels, wooden slats, pieces of metal. In short, these are the leftovers from various industries. These are the raw materials for potential craftsmen. This display of children's toys is constantly being added to. The creations are brought here by school children. There is also a section of items in need of repair. This now repaired record player had been marked down 50%. You can also find many parts and useful tools. Members of the Technical Creativity Society hold seminars here. Today there are already 60 enterprises which participate in providing the stores with various materials. Many have cast the profit motive aside and are helping this beneficial and interesting store. Helping to economize, both on a large and small scale, is everybody's business.
Работники сферы обслуживания Ставрополья – частые гости животноводов.
This next report describes a store of another sort. This one has wheels.
Service workers in Stavropol are often guests of cattle breeders. This is the life of a livestock farmer. The better part of the day is spent working. It is especially difficult for them in winter. From sunup to sunset, they are busy and tend to forget about their personal interests. There is no time to go to the store to buy anything. The cooperatives come to the rescue. They took the social responsibility for the livestock region. On their route from farm to farm, there are about 320 stores on wheels. What do they bring to the farm? What do they offer the livestock breeders? They have clothing, shoes, items needed in the home, and other goods. The proprietors of the Spassk region have even rehabilitated this bus, which has served for many years. It has been turned into an excellent store on wheels. But there are still problems for these cooperatives. There is a demand for goods which are not available from the stores on wheels. For example, sewing machines are rarely available, and separators as well. There are problems with transportation. We did not show this bus converted to a store on wheels by accident. Into this krai, only 30 vehicles come every year. This makes for less than one vehicle per region. You can imagine how many years it will take to meet the demand for vehicles needed by all the stores on wheels.
Improving quality is a familiar theme on Soviet TV. This next feature appeared January 27th on a show entitled Science and Life. It describes how quality control measures are used to improve product consistency around the Soviet Union.
The Institute is utilizing automated testing equipment. The Universal Complex for Refrigerators allows the machine, without an operator, to test the refrigerator on 24 different functions simultaneously and register the results on a printer. While we were preparing this report, we were informed from Kiev that experiments with an acoustic booth that the builders of the vacuum cleaner Rocket 9 is drastically reducing its noise level. These washing machines are being tested. How is their quality determined? Of course, the quality of the wash itself is the first consideration, how clean and how carefully the machine operates. How does the washing machine affect the durability of the clothes after 20 washings? The economy of the machine is one important factor, and of course the amount of time which a housewife must spend on her laundry is another. One of the main factors concerning all electrical appliances is its warranty and its safety. Even after the kind of shower which the washing machine is now receiving, it must be functional and safe. This test carries the most responsibility. Washing machines must be designed and manufactured in such a way that they would serve us well and safely, even if they are being handled awkwardly or improperly. The tests for quality are far from giving an appliance a passing grade every time. The negative results, disappointingly, are not few.
Далеко не всегда испытания на качество оканчиваются успешно. От географии, где производится эта продукция, чтобы были единые требования. Я хочу отметить недобрым словом продукцию города Чимкента и города Винницы.
I want to show you two products from the city of Chimento and the city of Vinica, two inferior products. I don't want you to confuse them with these quality products which I am showing you now. You remember that not long ago, our locally produced laundry detergents had a very bad reputation, and suddenly they disappeared from the shelves altogether. The explanation is simple. The center established in Kiev forbid the production of subpar products. The reconstruction of production took time. Then, the problem of deficits was solved. Here in the center begins the scientific testing of laundry detergents. As a powder, they contain many components, and if any of the chemical ingredients are improper, the entire substance cannot perform to standards. In 1984, we tested more than 500 kinds of detergent. On the basis of the test, the commission in charge of quality control discontinued the production of the Chaika and the Universal factories due to their use of old technology in mixing their product, also taking the Progress factory out of business because it did not meet current standards. And it also gave the governmental seal of approval to 14 laundry detergents.
Not all Soviet consumer stories are upbeat. Some offer a surprisingly honest look at problems yet to be solved, like this story from February 1st about the Soviet housing industry.
In the new edition of the party program, there is a directive to pay close attention to the quality of apartment construction, raising the comfort level and raising the technical standards in individual apartments and houses. The joys and sorrows of new tenants is what the correspondent has named her report. Every year in Yezhkorod, there are thousands of cubic meters of living space constructed. Right now, there are new tenants moving into house number 8 on Ansikherov Street. It was built by the building cooperative 101 of Murrisk. Anton Pavlovich, you have just completed 149 apartments. You see the new tenants moving in. How do you feel about this? I feel satisfaction. How would you rate your work, especially in terms of quality? The quality of our work will be determined by the tenants. So let's listen to their opinions. Our film crew spent time in many apartments, and what you will see and hear now are typical reactions. Here's an example. You open a cupboard door and it falls off. There isn't one shelf in this cupboard. Some kind of builders. What are we supposed to do, steal the shelves? I think that the builder feels that you ought to be grateful just to be in a new apartment. The amount of work and repair the new apartment may need is none of their business. You call this quality? We will never find wallpaper that will match this, so we have to change the wallpaper in all of the rooms. Here the linoleum is bad, and there's water on the floor. So the linoleum has to be fixed too. The doors and the windows don't open. They all have to be done over. The simplest things don't work. I feel shame for the builders. Everything they do is slapdash. Don't they take any pride in their work? We play this tape to the foreman of the building crew. What do you say to this, Anton Pavlovich? I have nothing to say. Now here's a case where any commentary is superfluous. But still, what of the Government Building Inspection Commission, which accepted this building as satisfactory?
Now, if that last piece isn't the Soviet I-team, I don't know what it is. I mean, Al Austin would have been in seventh heaven. How do you react to that?
I think this is revolutionary, and we've been seeing the whole trend for the last 7 months, but I think that this whole issue of housing is something which has never really perked to the surface. In all the trips that I made to the Soviet Union, there's always been this obvious question: why do new houses have to be repaired before they have tenants in them? I went to the Leningrad housing factory once, prefabricated housing factory, and this produces these huge cellular units which are assembled in sort of a cube form. And at the end of the production line, they had someone repairing the exterior portions. This is on the production line itself. Now, usually I occasionally meet people who say, well, you know, it's a socialist system, therefore it belongs to nobody, therefore why should anybody bother to keep it up? But here we see it coming right, the finished product falling apart.
And it's being mentioned. Well,
this is the revolution, the fact that it makes TV.
An attack on the government.
Well, in the 1970s, the television carried many stories during the Brezhnev era about we're answering the needs of housing, we're building more. Characteristic of Gorbachev, they're saying we're building it poorly. They're talking about quality control. But there's also a larger political message here. Anton Pavlovich isn't the only construction foreman to go. There was a series of scandals of housing in Moscow in the fall that led and they didn't stop the stories. They let the newspapers keep covering them, and it went to the top. The head of the Moscow party was sacked, and just shortly, a few weeks ago, the mayor of Moscow was sacked.
I'd love to know how and by whom and at what level is it decided to let stories like this build up?
What Steve touched upon is obvious to any visitor of the Soviet Union. Housing is one of the main gripes, so Gorbachev doesn't have to be a genius.
Check now. I think there's a blank check.
To pick housing to
But
talk
I think there's
about.
another thing that underlies this whole thing. The Soviet Union is getting to a point where in the near future it's going to satisfy most of the needs of the domestic population. It's going to have some sort of export market. I think the underlying question is, where is that export market going to be? Now, they're not going to be selling much in the United States, and they're probably not going to be selling much in Eastern Europe, or in Western Europe, but certainly there's the third world market. And even this thing with labeling of detergents, if you have an inferior product, you're going to lose out to the Japanese, to the Americans, to the West Europeans, even to the Middle Eastern countries. You're going to lose out because they're in the nascent process of production as well.
I was startled to see that much brand differentiation among soaps. I guess I thought it was all in olive drab boxes saying soap, but there's an appearance created that there's competition and that the government is testing, and they're going to say you're making a lousy detergent. Is this new?
I've seen varying products over the years. To see this many soaps is genuinely revolutionary, I think. It may suggest some problems in the allocation of resources to try to overcompensate for the lack of things in the consumer industry. But the fact that they're jumping on this problem and saying, look, we can't even use this stuff, it's a bunch of junk, is really innovative, I think.
Dale, what is the seal of government approval? I mean, obviously that means perhaps more than the housekeeping seal of approval here in the United States, or doesn't it?
Well, all consumer goods come out with a certain mark on them, that is what quality they are by grades. First quality, second quality, third quality. The price is on there, on the label, where it's made, which factory it's been made in, and all of this information is on the label. Joe will have to look in his new fur hat. I'm sure you'll find one there. Right. Find one there. It's on wristwatches that come out. Everything is labeled as far as quality.
Historic problem with car manufacturers was even cars, when they came off the production line, indicated the day of the week when they were made. And obviously, if you didn't want to buy a car that was made on a Monday because the workers were drunk over the weekend, so everything probably was misfitted.
That doesn't seem unique to the Soviet Union.
No, not at all.
Nick, I see refrigerators.
Yes,
well, remember last time or two we saw the Refrigerator Hall of Fame. Were you able to track that down when you were in Moscow?
I hate to tell you, Joe, and our viewers, that I tried. I asked everyone who could direct me to the Jill Refrigerator Museum to explain the interest of the state of Minnesota in that product, but alas, I'm afraid they treated the request like I was slightly demented.
Isn't this an incredible upgrading from the time when having a refrigerator was something that was rare to testing washing machines and whatnot? Do you see this also as part of the burgeoning of a possible export economy?
I think it's definitely that case.
Well, one of the things we see so much of on Soviet television is discussion or news items on appliances. Is there an obsession with the government about appliances? I mean, are they trying to promote this more
It's a measure of equality, I think, because everyone who comes to the Soviet Union as a tourist has some sort of gadget. If it's not a Walkman, it's a miniaturized tape recorder of some sort or another, or a radio that has multi-bands, or something new. Even videotapes are coming in now. And it's always a competitive catch-up game that they're playing to get the technology. The big thing in the mid-'70s was calculators. And every year there was an incremental leap in the technology.
Like you want to disagree.
I'm waiting. I think another aspect of this is this whole idea that women want more household appliances. They're going to be working all day, having to stand in line to get various groceries, things of this sort, various services, and they're asking for more appliances and better appliances, washing machines, refrigerators, things of this sort that we consider just essential.
Adele, you raised something because...
You get the last word.
Oh, we're going to move on?
Yes, we are. A bit later in tonight's show, we'll give you the chance to browse through a recent edition of Pravda. All you'll need to do is to record the final few minutes of this program on any VCR that has freeze frame advance. We'll tell you when to start your machines. But before we get to that, we saw a wide variety of international stories covered by the Soviets this past month. As we did see earlier, they devoted much coverage to the space shuttle disaster, but they also covered our new national holiday, remembering Martin Luther King.
Выдающегося борца за гражданские права Мартина Лютера Кинга.
When Soviet commentators discuss American heroes, they usually focus on so-called political prisoners like Leonard Peltier. But last month was different. We saw two positive stories January 21st about Martin Luther King, including this lengthy report about King's contribution to the American civil rights movement.
Our next item is from the United States. On Monday, January 20th, in the form of a federal holiday, the birthday of Martin Luther King is being celebrated for the first time. Martin Luther King was the most famous, almost legendary, fighter for the rights of black Americans, for equality, which became widespread in the 50s and 60s of this century. Martin Luther King, a Baptist minister and the son of a Baptist minister, was born on January 15, 1929, and was barbarically murdered on April 4th, 1968. As our contemporary, he has taken his historical and tragic place in the annals of other great Americans.
Атланта, город, где родился Мартин Лютер Кинг.
Atlanta is the city in which Martin Luther King was born on January 15, 1929. Here is his memorial. This is King City. It took 16 years of marches and demonstrations to get Martin Luther King's birthday to be designated as a national holiday. It must be noted that a government holiday affects 5 million government workers, while state, city, and private businessmen decide for themselves whether or not to observe the holiday.
We've seen coverage of U.S. military advancements before on Soviet TV. This report from January 30th illustrates how computers are helping the U.S. military to modernize.
According to the American press, there is currently in the United States a move towards modernization of a variety of systems in the military forces. Coming under the heading of modernization is a number of computers used for the maximal camouflage of military vehicles and weapons for use in any kind of climate and terrain. As we can see in the Western press, the administration, forcing the arms race, is bringing unforeseen profits to American corporations. As opposed to companies who work in the civilian field, the companies involved with the military did not suffer during the recent economic crisis.
U.S. intervention in other countries is a common theme on Soviet news programs. This report from January 27th describes the tense situation in Libya last month when the U.S. fleet neared Libyan shores.
The Sixth Fleet of the United States continues its show of strength off the coast of Libya. The American television company ABC showed this report about the maneuvers in the Mediterranean of the American aircraft. Participating in the maneuvers are 14 American ships, including 2 aircraft carriers, which are positioned in the Gulf of Sidra. In Tripoli, there was a demonstration of thousands of people protesting the naval military provocations of the U.S. in close proximity to the shores of Libya. They were condemning the policy of terrorism conducted by the administration of the United States. They agreed on a pact which would repel any attempt of American imperialism on the rights and freedom of Libya. The leader of the Libyan revolution, Gaddafi, condemned the maneuvers of the U.S. military off the coast of Libya. In an interview on French television, he judged the acts of the American government as terrorist, saying that Washington, through economic and military pressure, is attempting to frighten the Libyan people.
Пробираться долгими окольными путями в Афганистан. Виноваты они только в одном, в том, что отстаивая свои...
Once again this month, Soviet TV offered several views of the war in Afghanistan. This extensive report from January 21st describes how Pakistani counter-revolutionaries are destroying Afghani families and their homes.
А иначе афгано-пакистанская граница.
This is how the traditional areas of the Pashtuns look now, on the territory of democratic Afghanistan. But near here is the Nangarhar province on the border with Pakistan. At the foot of these very same white mountains, another kind of life exists. No longer do we see the traditional caravans of the weavers, but the bitter road of refugees. In the name of my tribesmen living in Khabir in the Lunda-Katawa region, said the representative Golamir, I want to say that the Pakistani authorities are destroying our homes and villages, and they are killing innocent people. But we, in the manner of our fathers and grandfathers, will take up arms to defend our land and our rights. We appeal to all our brothers and other tribes to help us in this fight. Look into the faces of these proud, handsome people. Their forefathers 3 times fought back the English colonizers. And now again, full of bitterness and disappointment, these people are demanding the most basic human rights from the government.
And finally, last fall, as you may remember, a group of Minnesota children participated in a program linking them via satellite with children in Moscow. On January 27th, portions of that program appeared on Soviet TV. It was used as a springboard to discuss Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's peace initiatives. And if you look very closely, you can almost see one of the Minnesota co-hosts, Don Shelby. The show, called Peace Bridge, was designed to encourage peaceful exchanges between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
This is the regular meeting of the political club, the Contemporaries. Thanks to television technology, we return to the first days of January for the telebridge between Minnesota and Moscow. Over there, and in the political club, the talk centered around one subject, the understanding between people about what tomorrow would be like on the planet. A guest of the club on this particular night was the writer and laureate, winner of the Lenin Award, Mikhail Azorov. We have just watched a telebridge dedicated to Samantha Smith. We heard the words of happiness, of goodness, of peace. But of course, the greatest impact of the words about peace were heard in the words of Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev. In the program for reducing nuclear arms, are there any obstacles in its way? It is imperative to address this question. I must say that so far the Americans have not been able to rid themselves of this antiquated way of thinking. And listening to you, a thought just crossed my mind, that I love a certain artist. His name is Francisco Goya. You are aware of him, I'm sure, and know his series of paintings, which is called the Caprices. There are these frightful human-like figures depicted in the pictures who attack each other, go into convulsions, attack people. They are terrifying paintings. And Francisco Goya, having painted this series, said the following, which I vividly remember. The dreams of the intellect create monsters. And it seems that the mind of this painter has penetrated to the present. It seems that he has looked through the windows of the White House, where it seems to this moment that the intellect is still asleep. Because if it were not asleep, it would not be creating these kind of nuclear monsters like winged rockets, Pershings, and so on and so on. And it is these nightmares, this adherence to outdated thinking, this is perhaps the biggest obstacle we face today. How do the Americans themselves react to the proposals of Gorbachev? I must say that recently there have been many encouraging words from the President of America. Particularly in Geneva, he spoke of the new status between our two countries. He has repeated those words over and over. Many times he has said that in a nuclear war there can be no winner. But I repeat that these are just words. But where's the action? For all practical purposes, there is no action to be seen. Moreover, it is an attempt to capitalize on our love of peace. The latest example is the moratorium. Meanwhile, in Washington, they are rubbing their hands in delight. It's so nice, they say, that the Soviet Union has stopped testing nuclear weapons. And in the meantime, we will more actively continue our own testing. In other words, they are trying to get some points at the cost of our love for peace. The people of Western Europe, they are democratic and they oppose war. There are even people there who are not reacting positively to our proposal. This is why we can say, without necessarily being over-optimistic, that we can look to the future and say that everything is going to be all right, that those tasks that are set before us will become realities.
Something very strange in there. I didn't know the Russians were worried about our camouflaged pickup trucks in the Army. Is there some deeper meaning to that computer story, Nick?
Well, I think whenever you have a portrait, either by the United States of a Soviet threat or the Soviet Union of an American threat, it's really designed to help you justify the modernization of your own equivalent forces. In this case, it's a story about the modernization, the computerization of American conventional forces. What's not in there is that for the last year and a half, the Soviet military have been discussing exactly the same problem, that we spend too much time on the big nuclear issues, and we really have to talk about computer technology, computer literacy, if we're going to have decent soldiers, if we're going to have the economic infrastructure for our conventional forces.
Well, I think even beyond that, the new school reform stresses computer literacy. When it started into effect, I think about a year ago.
Are the Soviets playing catch-up on computers?
Oh, certainly.
Don't they have as widespread a use of the computer as we do?
Oh, no,
not at all.
Nowhere near. But the publicity of the last year, and as was just referred to, these education reforms are clearly directed towards the problems of computing and developing computer literacy among the population.
In other words, it's not unusual to walk into almost any teacher's office at the university, a professor's office at the university, a business person's office, even a government official's office, and see some kind of personal computer on their desk or nearby. Would you find that in the Soviet Union?
No, not at all. They haven't gotten to that point yet psychologically to allow the freedom of access.
I don't know. I don't know if you have to say it's a psychological problem, Steve. I mean, it just may be a cultural phenomenon. My favorite example I always use is the the cash register system. Since the late 70s, they have brought in modern computerized cash register systems. 9 times out of 10, they're never in use. They're sitting there and they want to use the abacus.
Or I've seen people, saleswomen, check it out on the cash register, then check themselves on the abacus.
After all, they may be just being more frank. Most Americans probably do the same thing in their office.
But there is a control factor. I mean, just last week in the news, there was a story out of Romania that the Romanians were thinking of licensing typewriters all of a sudden. And there was some scrutiny from Congress because of most favored nation status of Romania and what this meant for freedom of information.
Well, this isn't uncommon. In Iraq, you have to have a government license to own a typewriter.
This is...
That hasn't had much to do with the Soviet Union.
No, well, it implies the problem of computerization, what's happening.
Stephen, let me switch on to something else, and that was really the last piece that we saw. Some of the quotes, if I got them close to what we heard, the Lenin, or the writer, whom we don't know, but the writer who won the Lenin Award, he talked about that as we look through the windows of the White House, where we find the intellect is still asleep. That we are the lovers of peace, but obviously Reagan is not, or the they don't say the American people are not, but they are the lovers of peace. And what about we? Who are we?
In much of the rhetoric that comes out of the Soviet Union, of course, we're right in terms of our peace policy. The American government is wrong, but there's always a distinction made between the American government and the American people. I've heard this time and time again. You know, that we know that you as people are interested in peace, but your government is wrong. The link that they fail to make, and this happens on many levels of society, is that they don't understand that the American people have put that government there, and that whatever they find distasteful about American policy, American foreign policy, especially over strategic arms limitations, that government is by and large reflective of a democratic foreign policy. And then the other question, which is implicit there, is where does their come from? They're always quoting Gorbachev.
Yeah, but Steve, they can be befuddled on this issue. Because how can they, I mean, they cover the United States, how can they cover the peace movement in the United States, the genuine concern, and the disparity between popular opinion and the administration's opinion on that issue?
Well, and I think the one thing that he did mention there, he said, we see all of these, hear all these fine words and so on, but where are the deeds to go with them?
Maybe they're right.
Well, how many?
Maybe they are right. This is
it
the
would be
Russian
curious
side of
as
the
to how
nuclear
many
argument. Maybe we ought to
Americans
listen
would
to
agree
them.
with what he was saying, with his characterization
More
of
the
our
point,
government.
How many Germans will agree with it? How many French will agree with it? How many Italians? How many Dutch? How many Belgians?
It is much easier for the Soviets to deal with the issue because they're a European power as well as a global power. And when you take the American issue of deployment of missiles, it is a foreigner whose interests are across the ocean, interfering in European affairs, which in their light is something that should be.
It was de Gaulle who said he didn't think the Americans would risk Washington to save Paris.
But the heart of the matter now is that they feel they have the momentum on the peace issue in the Soviet Union, in Europe. They feel that Gorbachev has initiated the summit. They feel that he's made the more progressive proposals. They feel he should be getting more publicity. And they know in fact, what Joe just referred to is correct. He's getting more attention in Europe. And they hope he's getting more attention in the United States. I mean, it was last week, there was a full page 3 of the New York Times. Full page ad of Gorbachev's peace proposal.
Has to be underscored because in the Brezhnev era, this stuff was coming out and nobody was believing it because it was contemporary with the Afghanistan invasion and
it was
everybody remembered
clumsier,
Czechoslovakia, much clumsier. This is polished. We've seen it for 4 or 5 months now, since October and November, and it's a very clear policy and it's effective. I think we have to appreciate it.
Any comments, Nick, on the Pakistan piece that we saw?
Well, my general comment is that the story and coverage of Afghanistan is much more pervasive than I ever expected it to be. It's on television all the time. It's in the news, and people are talking about it.
And they are.
And so, I mean, and people are also complaining about it.
Any talk about casualties?
Yes, I was at a meeting at the Leningrad Friendship Society, and a young professor actually got up and was quite angry about Afghanistan and referred to 3 friends who had died in that war. People are talking about it.
That sounds familiar.
They're concerned. So, I mean, what television has responded to, what we're seeing, is the fact it is become an issue, and it's become an inescapable issue.
Adele, the piece on Martin Luther King, there was no statement, as we were discussing earlier, about, and the civil rights movement must continue in the United States. It was a straight piece about one of the American heroes, really, now in our history. Was that unusual from your perspective?
Well, no, I don't think so. They did stress the fact that it took 16 years
yes, they did. That's
before
true.
before these things that he was fighting for, struggling for, really came to be realized. But we've mentioned at other times before, there's sort of a schizophrenic attitude. You see, you know, all of the blacks are denigrated, they're suffering, they're poor, and so on. And then you get this thing like the Martin Luther King thing, a national holiday. You know, it's a difficult situation for them to handle, I think. They're not quite sure what to do.
Well, Adele Donchenko, on that note, I must thank you. Stephen Feinstein, thank you very much. Nick Hayes, thank you very much for being with us. That is it for the February edition of Channel 3 Moscow. Okay, as we mentioned earlier tonight, we will be giving you a chance to browse through a recent edition of Pravda, translated into English by Associated Publishers of St. Paul. If you have your VCR ready, start recording now, and we will transmit several stories to you at high speed. After the show, you can simply use your freeze frame advance to slow the images down to read them. All right, here we go. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's program, and we hope you'll feel comfortable calling us with your comments and suggestions regarding tonight's show. The number to call is 642-1980. You will be talking to an answering machine, so there is no excuse to be shy. That number again is 642-1980. We will be back with the March edition of Channel 3 Moscow on Wednesday, March 19th at 8 p.m., so mark your calendars. And Joe and I will be back here Friday night at 7 p.m. for Almanac. We leave you with the sounds of our favorite American expatriate singer, Dean Reed. Did I say that? Thanks for joining us, and good night to all of you.
Channel 3 Moscow is a production of KTCA-TV Channel 2 for stations of the Minnesota Public Television Network.